BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac-Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin.
Alright, hello everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. Just a couple of quick announcements and reminders before we begin. The first one is that there is a new episode of the podcast Serial Killer Z to A available anywhere you get your podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify. This is a Zodiac Killer channel original production, and therefore the first episode and season of Serial Killer Z to A is all devoted to the Zodiac Killer. That's the entire season, so you can get that anywhere you get your podcasts. And reminders for BlackBoxOnlineRadio, there's a regular series coming out about the New Orleans Axeman that comes out every Wednesday. This is an unsolved serial killer mystery from the earlier part of the 20th century. Some similarities to the Zodiac Killer, but I'm noticing several more that are similar to Jack the Ripper, and then there are elements of the Axeman mystery that are absolutely different compared to the Zodiac, or compared to the Ripper, or even compared to the Phantom Killer. But on that note, I would like to make the announcement that most likely there are going to be 2 more episodes in the Axeman series, and then I would like to get back to the Phantom Killer mystery, because I was trying some different things when I did a Phantom Killer series earlier this year. Some of it was done on video where I appeared on camera, some of it was done on podcast recordings like this one, and I really wanted to go back and redo the series and do it in somewhat of a more well-designed manner. So as I said, perhaps 2 more episodes in the Axeman series, and then there will be a restart of the Phantom Killer mystery here on this channel. I have to tell you what, I didn't even scratch the surface with the Phantom Killer mystery, and I think that I have a little bit more direction now, because the Axeman case was so straightforward. The books are just written in a particular order by different true crime writers. You should read this one first, and you should explore this one, and then go on to this one. And that's exactly what I've been doing on the Axeman series. And with the Phantom Killer mystery, I think I now have the understanding and the ability to do the same thing, to present the material in a more organized manner. And if you would like to support any of these efforts, you can go over to BuyMeACoffee.com. There's a link to that in the description box. BuyMeACoffee.com allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. Now, I have something that I'm going to tie into the Zodiac Killer mystery. And when I say I have something, this comment was actually written by Barry Lauber, who sent this in on a Zodiac Killer news report about 2 weeks ago. And it says, Ned, not a big fan of how you seem to be hating on so-called conspiracy theorists. You are aware that many theories that are put forth by so-called conspiracy theorists have proven to be truthful, right? Here are several. MKUltra, Project Sunshine, the poisoning of alcohol being encouraged by the U.S. government during Prohibition, Edith Wilson essentially serving as president for over a year after Woodrow Wilson had suffered a debilitating stroke, the Dalai Lama being a CIA asset, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the Canadian government's development of gaydar in the 1960s, and perhaps the most disturbing of all would be the declassified Operation Northwoods, which called for American saboteurs to attack and kill thousands of American civilians and then blame it all on Cuba. Just saying, conspiracy theorists aren't always wrong. I mean, Barry's right. Absolutely, he is right that not all conspiracy theorists are wrong. And I did want to read that because he is addressing several very important ones here, whether it's MK Ultra, the Dalai Lama being a CIA asset, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. I mean, how about that one? I mean, the role of the Vietnam War, and of course Operation Northwoods. And I could talk to you guys for an hour about several things on this list, but to keep this Zodiac focused, let's look at the true crime world. Absolutely, sometimes conspiracy theories turn out to be true. And I talked about this in not the first episode, but the second episode ever on Black Box Online Radio, saying that an overlooked example of how a conspiracy theory can be true is what happens in law enforcement with these unsolved mysteries. And I gained somewhat of an understanding of this from the Missing Maura Murray podcast, a show that I no longer follow. But what they said was that very frequently in the true crime world, errors are made in an investigation. Mistakes are made in an investigation. Someone has genuinely made some type of error when they were trying to solve a mystery by someone, the detectives, or maybe even a higher member of law enforcement, and they use their administrative power to cover it up. And on this channel, the definition for conspiracy theory that I use is two or more people hiding the truth, usually for a malicious reason. And, I mean, absolutely, there are going to be encounters of that. And the reason why I was so hard on conspiracy theorists in that most recent Zodiac Killer news report was that I was talking about several Zodiac Killer conspiracy theories that I didn't think were very accurate. And okay, I mean, Barry has shared some things on here. I mean, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, that's pretty much accepted U.S. history. MK Ultra has accepted U.S. history. If you were to talk about those things and say that they happened, they happened. People aren't just going to think you're some type of wild conspiracy theorist. Operation Northwoods, same story. Here's an example of a Zodiac killer conspiracy theory that is not widely accepted. And that would be the Zodiac-Manson connection that has been put forward by Howard Davis, because, again, two or more people hiding the truth, usually for a malicious reason. And what Howard Davis has proposed is that the authorities solved the Zodiac killer mystery, and it was a member of the Manson family. At least one of them, named Bruce Davis, committed the Zodiac murders in 1968 and 69, and they knew it was him. They found the Lake Berryessa costume that the Zodiac wore on September 27th of 1969, the hooded figure. They found that. They know who it was. It was Bruce Davis, and he was already going to jail, being sent life in prison because of his involvement with the Manson family murders, and with Bruce Davis, particularly the roles of the murders of Gary Hinman and Shorty Shea, although he is mostly viewed as a participant in those, as well as alleged involvement in a host of other crimes. It definitely doesn't sound like Bruce Davis was a saint. If you listen to an interview with him, he is all calm and southern and self-spoken. No, I don't really recall things about that. Alabama and East Tennessee in his voice, to be precise. But that's their theory. The supporters of the Zodiac-Manson connection, that the authorities know who did it. They just didn't want to prosecute because they're going to have to do another trial. The Manson trial was extremely expensive. They're going to spend millions of dollars on a new Zodiac killer trial for someone who's already going to jail for life, going to prison for life. And the problem is, though, so much of Howard Davis's theory is based on these conspiracy theory tactics that get conspiracy theorists a bad name. And that is that you have to trust him. You just have to accept Howard Davis's story. I mean, he starts out by saying that he has a retentive memory and remembers events exactly as they happen. Then he says that he's taken a voice stress analysis test to show that he has actually heard someone who is a pristine source to the district attorney's office telling him this, and he actually remembered the conversation, and someone actually told him this. Okay, he just wants you to trust him. And he says that maybe he'll take a polygraph test in the future if he can get the money together, but those are more expensive. And it just comes down to whether or not he has actually heard these events. And Michael Butterfield of ZodiacKillerFacts.com allegedly found the quote-unquote pristine source that shared this information with Bruce Davis, and he has denied that. Now this person's name has been withheld, of course. That's why we're just calling him the pristine source. That's what he has been referred to online, and I'm sure if we dig deeply enough we can find it. But I just don't like the whole concept of how you have to accept somebody's narrative because they're the one telling the story. And a lot of people will do this in discussion groups and on threads, and they will present an idea about how they have solved the Zodiac Killer mystery, they know the truth about the Zodiac Killer mystery. Someone has told them everything firsthand, whether they're saying my dad was the Zodiac and he told me everything before he died. That's one thing that comes up from time to time. Other people simply just say that they have the truth, and they won't say how they learned the truth, other than it came from first-hand sources who have told them that. And I don't really entertain those too much, because those are examples of true crime conspiracies that are most likely not true. Let's address the elephant in the room. Those types of things where just someone says, yeah, my dad told me he was the Zodiac Killer before he died and there's no evidence. So that's most likely not true. I mean, how many people are we actually looking for, and how many people have said that their daddy was the Zodiac Killer? But a side note about conspiracy theories. I have several episodes on this channel talking about cartoon conspiracies, and I learned a lot about this in maybe 2016, maybe 2015. People were just sharing the stuff online when they talk about how the cartoons that, well, I watched growing up all have these, like, hidden meanings, and that all the characters are dead and they're actually ghosts, so to speak, or that all the characters on a cartoon show are living in purgatory, or one character is actually supposed to be viewed as smart and the other is actually supposed to be viewed as dumb. And I was like, whoa, they're calling these cartoon conspiracy theories? Are these really cartoon conspiracies? I mean, these sound just like hidden meanings, or like some type of symbolic representation, or it's almost just like a secret joke among the writers. Ah, wait. Secret. Yes, so I would even think that those count as conspiracy theories, because a conspiracy is two or more people hiding the truth, usually for a malicious reason, but not always. That's just the writers having some fun, but they're hiding the truth all the same, if indeed those things are true, and a lot of that is just people who have overactive imagination. But I did say in the second episode of Black Box Online Radio that I talked about true crime conspiracy theories. This is an old Black Box recording from 2017. However, what I said in that episode was, we can have a shift in human thought from conspiracy theory to independent investigator. I was even tempted to write an entire book about this called Independent Investigations, and the subtitle would have to be something like A Rebranding of What We Formerly Knew as Conspiracy Theories, because that's what a lot of these people are doing. They are independent investigators. They're simply trying to find out the truth. They think they've stumbled upon something. Why not investigate further? And again, the government is up to a lot of nasty stuff that they don't want us to know about. It's just, sadly, sometimes people accuse person A of doing something, and they didn't actually do it. It was actually person B, so it's quite difficult to get the narrative straight. But I do thank you so much for that particular comment, Barry, as well as thank you to guys for listening to that brief insertion about the Zodiac-Manson connection. And to be very clear, there are other reasons why the Zodiac-Manson connection is not true. Bruce Davis was almost certainly too short to be the Zodiac Killer. I have a photo of him where he was listed as 5 feet 6 inches tall, and the Zodiac was definitely taller than that. I think within the range of 5'8" to 6 feet tall. And then Howard Davis has to say, well, he could have been wearing platform boots at Lakebury, yes, I kid thee not. And then, okay, well, maybe he looks a little bit younger than some of the witness descriptions. Well, he could have had aging lines drawn on with pencil makeup, I kid thee not. And then, okay, well, he had long hair in 1969, and the Zodiac Killer very clearly had a crew cut. in the witness descriptions after the Stein murder, okay, well, he could have slicked his hair back and put on a skull cap wig. Oh, it's always he could have done this, he could have done that. Well, he's talking about how his suspect doesn't match the witness descriptions, and it's going on overdrive. But on that note, Howard Davis doesn't insist that Bruce Davis committed all of the murders. He states that the Manson family were responsible, that Charles Manson orchestrated the Zodiac killer murders, and that there could have been multiple participants. We have an excellent comment that came in on the channel. On that channel, oh yes, of course, it's on the channel Black Box Online Radio. An excellent comment that came in on the episode Zodiac Killer: My Personal Theories, another old Black Box recording, but this one's from 2020, and this is from Philly Throwback, who says that I do like the group murder theory, particularly one killer, one letter writer. The Don Chaney Arthur Lee Allen is a favorite, but DNA and fingerprints seem to exclude. I think they both killed, but I think Lee wrote the letters. I'm just speculating, but I think they had a falling out, and that's when Don went to the police to pin it on Allen, and Allen knew he couldn't tell the police the truth. P.S. I like Drew's version of the interview that you did with him. I guess that's the interviews with the experts on the Zodiac Killer channel. I'm also the host of that program. I want that to be the truth. But see my other comment, meaning that, one killer, one letter writer. Yes, Drew Beeson is the author of Sighting In on the Zodiac Killer, and he has been more or less the loudest voice talking about how Donald Lee Chaney could have been the Zodiac Killer. Don Chaney was a friend of Arthur Lee Allen, but they had some type of falling out, and the perhaps popular narrative is that Arthur Lee Allen was indeed a child molester, and he molested Don Chaney's daughter, but I don't believe the molestation ever happened. Drew Beeson doesn't believe the molestation ever happened, and that this whole thing that Don Chaney is gonna talk to Robert Graysmith and go on the documentaries that were included in 2007 just to slander and to talk trash about Arthur Lee Allen, saying that he was the Zodiac, just as some type of twisted revenge plot. I don't think so for the following reasons. Arthur Lee Allen was not known to have targeted girls as young as 3 years old, the way that the age that John Chaney's daughter would have been at the time. He also maintained a friendship with Don Chaney for at least 6 months after the alleged molestation occurred, so I think that it just didn't happen, and that it's just a story that has been incorporated into the mix. But this is a variant of the multiple killers theory, that there is Don Chaney and Arthur Lee Allen working in tandem. I've thought about this, you've thought about this, everyone has thought about this. I even did an old recording in 2018 called Arthur Lee Allen's Partner, because even though I don't think Arthur Lee Allen is the strongest Zodiac killer suspect, there is a certain amount of evidence against him. There's a reason why people were looking at this guy for so long, Arthur Lee Allen, and it seemed to me that, well, what if the explanation was as simple as he had a partner, and that they've picked up someone else's forensic material that has been left behind, particularly something such as DNA, or perhaps something such as the side palm print, like also known as writer's palm, the way that the hand is pressed against the paper when someone is writing, then that's why someone else's material has come back. So the forensics are pointing at a different person. Could there have been two killers? And to be very clear, since I did that recording back in 2020, I have been able to gain a possible understanding of some of the facts and events. I repeat, possible. This is an unsolved case. I'm just some guy on the internet like anybody else. I don't have any first-hand relationship with detectives. But number one, do they have the Zodiac Killer's DNA? Almost certainly not. They've extracted DNA from the letters, but I do not think we have the ability to say it belongs to the Zodiac Killer. And by the letters, I mean not only it's the envelope, and not only the envelope, the stamp. Touch DNA from the stamp of the envelope. And when ABC News did a story about the Zodiac Killer back in 2002, they talked about how the DNA came from the stamp on the envelope from the November 8th, 1969 correspondence. Now, that was not mentioned in the show. I had to go back and find the write-up that ABC did for the show talking about oh, on Primetime Live, we're going to be talking about the Zodiac Killer. The episode's coming out on such and such date. And that's when they said that it was from the November 8th, 1969 correspondence, just citing the source. Point number two. That side palm print that I was talking about, the writer's palm, that was lifted from the 1974 Exorcist letter. And much as Philly was talking about, well, what about the letters from 1969 or 1970 or 1971? Were those all written by the same person? And furthermore, what exactly would be the arrangement if there were some type of multiple killers theory? Because I really have to give a shout out to Roland Marshall Downs, who brought this to my attention, and I use the terms like group murder theory, multiple killers theory. And let's go through some of that real fast, because multiple killers theory is the big umbrella term. And then the group murder theory would be something like an organized group, that there was a specific group of people that planned these things together, and that they thought that they were going to do this as some type of thrill kill club, or that there was some type of reason why more than one person was involved with the Zodiac crimes. But what Roland pointed out was that not all multiple killers theories require an organized group. And the good way of looking at this is, let's look at some examples. Number one, the hoax theory that's put forward by Thomas Henry Horan, that states that there were an unconnected set of homicides and someone wrote letters taking credit for them. That's the Zodiac Killer hoax theory. But an example that is closer to this comment would be that Lake Berryessa was a copycat, that one person committed the shootings at Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, and the Stein murder, and then somebody else committed the Lake Berryessa stabbing. That's why the victims were stabbed. That's why the killer wore the hood one time. That's why the victims were tied up. That's why the killer wrote a message on a car door. That's why the killer had an extended conversation with the victims. And the killer could have learned about the Zodiac from the papers, or, I mean, just that would pretty much be it. That's how he obtained the Zodiac Killer symbol. It was published on August 4th of 1969 in the Vallejo Times-Herald. So that's an example of how there were multiple killers, but they aren't working together. And I don't endorse that particular theory. I get curious about it. But another piece of evidence that is in favor of that is the Zodiac Killer didn't write a letter stating, okay, here are some facts that only I and the police know. He simply just alluded to it in the letter after the Stein murder. I'm the murderer of the taxi driver and the guy who killed the kids in the North Bay area, paraphrasing, but he just calls them the kids in the North Bay area. So does that not suggest that there could have been two killers involved, or that Lake Berryessa was a copycat? Now, other people have simply tried to address the fact that there isn't a consistent serial killer operating. They're like, this was one killer. And by looking at the differences, that doesn't mean that there were multiple killers. That's just jumping to conclusions. That's making assumptions. There could have been one killer. And I've been discussing this recently with someone named Sphere the Cube. That's his YouTube name. Also uses the name Sphery, as I refer to him as. And we've been doing a regular segment on the weekends talking about a new Zodiac suspect named Robert Volvins. And what he has more or less proposed is that the Zodiac Killer didn't have a consistent pattern at all. Yes, at Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs, those are both shootings where the victims were originally seated in the car, but at Lake Herman Road, the victims definitely were brought out of the car at some point. Betty Lou Jensen was running away, and she was shot, and the Zodiac Killer said he had a pencil flashlight on the gun, so that's why he was able to see at night. That does seem to work, by the way. But what is truly interesting is that Suri has pointed out that he has just no pattern at all. He, meaning the Zodiac. This is someone who is committing crimes inconsistently. They aren't all done in a very specific way. And I know that this is going to sound like a really, really weird connection, but yesterday I was watching the movie The Woman in the Window with Amy Adams, and I'm not giving away any spoilers, but there is a killer who says that, I'm just getting started. I'm not quite sure what to do with it. Again, it's about a killer. and not giving away who the killer is, but that's what he said, that he hasn't formed a pattern yet. The ambition is to kill. The ambition is to just bring terror down upon humanity, or the ambition is to just do things that are fueling the neurotransmitters in his brain in a destructive way and not get caught. Getting revenge on society, getting revenge on humanity, but not get caught. Now, how is he going to do this? Any way that he wants. I did do a video presentation once called The Zodiac Killer Full Analysis, which again I do appear on camera, if anybody would like to venture down that path. And there was a comment that came in on that one from Garmin Bozia, who says, "It makes no sense that the Zodiac Killer switched his behavior and method of murder to avoid getting caught when he admits to all of the crimes, basically connecting the dots for the cops." Now, on the one hand, I completely agree with you about this whole theory that the Zodiac's an inconsistent serial killer and he's changing his method of operation so he doesn't get caught. Well, yes, then he is taking credit for it in letters and phone calls, and he has a piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt, and as well as Paul Stein's wallet and keys. So he could have been caught very easily if he had that stuff on him. Hey, well, yeah, obviously you're the killer. You have a piece of his bloody shirt in your pocket. On behalf of the people who think that the Zodiac was changing his behavior to avoid police detection, I think that that solely refers to when the crimes were committed, not being interrupted when the murders were taking place. Because after the Zodiac is away from the crime scene, then he can take credit for it, but he doesn't want to be interrupted while the murder is going on. Then, like, once he's a safe distance from where the police are actually looking, then he can make the phone call. And of course, then he can write letters in the privacy of his own home. Then he can even mail in a piece of the bloody shirt to show that he was the person responsible for the Stein murder. And there was a particular reason why I chose to read off that comment, because there is a form of counterbalance that we will see in our next comment that was written from Something From Nothing, that's the YouTube name, and this was published on Zodiac Killer Q&A Richard Gaikowski, Gaik edition, and that is an older recording from 2020 as well. Something From Nothing writes, "I think whoever the Zodiac was, he wasn't a competent killer. His method changed with every crime, and he made terrible mistakes on every one. In the first one, he ordered them out of the car and the girl ran away and got 28 feet before he managed to shoot her down. The second crime seemed to have a hesitating killer who drove away and then came back and corrected his previous crime of not giving the victims time to run by and shooting, but failed to kill one of the victims and left an eyewitness. Next, he tried to correct this mistake by using a mask that identified him as the Zodiac, but not his own identity. However, the male survived again, and the female actually lived long enough to describe seeing his face. Next, he left no doubt of killing his victim by shooting them in the head, referring to Paul Stein, but left witnesses nearby. The kids nearly saw everything, and the cops nearly caught him. He bumbled his way through each crime and only escaped by pure luck because of police incompetence." And to throw one thing in there, that's referring to the APB that was put out that said that they needed to be on the lookout for a black man, but they were actually mistaken. The APB was mistaken, and of course the Zodiac Killer is almost certainly Caucasian. I think nearly getting caught after the Stein murder made him lose his nerve and stop killing, and then a lack of attention from the press and public made him stop writing letters. Well, the end of the letters came much later on, because the Stein murder occurred on October 11th of 1969, and the letters go well into 1971, and then there's the halt in Zodiac activity for the years of 1972 and 73, and then the letters resurface again in 1974 with the Exorcist letter, as well as some of the unconfirmed communications, such as the Count Marco letter, also known as the Red Phantom letter, the Badlands card, which I was discussing recently on the episode Did the Zodiac Killer Murder Laura Jean Dugan? And then there is also the SLA letter, all in 1974, and then you have the 1978 letter, which is Some people think that that's a genuine communication. Other people think that that was a fabrication made by the Inspector Dave Toschi himself, the Detective Toschi, that is, and that he was just trying to. Well, he was involved with an unusual hobby of trying to get his name mentioned in the papers, writing letters to magazines and papers. And I shouldn't even say that because I don't want to talk about this in any inaccurate way, but he's writing fake letters, more or less, and it was something that he was doing with his family to see if he could get mentioned in a publication, and they're having a laugh about it. Did he fabricate the 1978 letter? It's certainly possible. I'm not 100% sure, but even if you go back and listen to an old recording of Mae Brussel talking about conspiracy theories in 1978, she's addressing the Zodiac Killer as this event is coming out, and people are immediately pointing toward Dave Toschi. It's not some wacky idea that someone dreamt up years later. From the beginning, he was under scrutiny and under pressure for possibly composing this letter. And then I do think, though, that Something from Nothing made a very good attempt at just composing the conventional narrative and the single killer theory. Just there's one person who made mistakes, and he's trying to cover up his mistakes, and he's trying to solve the problem, and each time it's getting worse and worse. But there are a couple points in Something from Nothing's comment. First, the Zodiac Killer is a terrible killer. First, he's not a good criminal, he's making mistakes every time. I mean, multiple victims survived the wrath of the evil Zodiac Killer, and they lived to tell the story about it. And he does point out that Cecilia Shepard, the victim from Lake Berryessa, did pass away until 2 days later in the hospital. Therefore, she was able to give a description of the Zodiac without his mask on at Lake Berryessa, saying that he was a Caucasian male, he had brown hair, and he well, I wasn't able to make out too many discernible features, but that does provide some info for it. And of course, we have the physical descriptions of the attacker at Lake Berryessa, estimated to have been about 6 feet tall and barrel chested, as well as possibly 200 to 225 pounds. So that's always something to think about. But here is one thing that Something from Nothing has said. The second crime, that's the Blue Rock Springs shooting, the Zodiac seemed to hesitate by driving away and coming back and correcting his previous crime of not giving the victims time to run by shooting straight away. He failed to kill one victim and left an eyewitness. But I think that that's talking about how Darlene Ferrin and Mike Michaud were the victims at Blue Rock Springs, and they're sitting in Darlene Ferrin's car. She's in the driver's seat, and Mike Michaud is in the passenger seat, and a car pulls up behind them, and then that car leaves, and then the Zodiac's car comes up and is behind them, and the cars did look very similar, but I don't believe we are 100% certain that that was indeed the same car. I mean, everything Something from Nothing said makes sense, but I think that there's a little bit of theorizing going on there. But which one do you tend to agree with? Do you tend to agree with this just one sloppy serial killer who made lots of mistakes and is always trying to change his mistakes? Or do you agree with the other comment about how there is one killer and one letter writer, or there's some type of multiple killers operation going on? What do you think about that? Which one made more sense to you? And why do you think the Zodiac Killer is trying not to get caught, but taunting the police all the same? Like, why is the Zodiac changing the way that he's committing crimes? And let's focus in on that question for just a second, because I think there needs a little bit more elaboration. Because, as you heard in one comment, someone is saying it's ridiculous to think that the Zodiac is changing the way he's committing the crimes to avoid getting caught, because he's giving the police the info anyway. He's connecting himself and inserting himself in the mystery. Now, the other comment is saying, oh yeah, this is just some sloppy killer who is making mistakes, and he's trying to cover up for the fact that he made mistakes in the past, but then making new mistakes. What is your response? Now, if we are dealing with one person, I can tell you what I genuinely think in a single killer theory. That would be that he wants to avoid capture. The Zodiac Killer does not want to get caught, but like many thrill killers, he wants to almost get caught. So that fuels the excitement. That just fuels the thrill. That adds to an additional layer of thrilling behavior where this person doesn't want to get caught, but they just want to keep things a little bit interesting. And I mean, they're just doing this not only as a form of entertainment, but entertainment on steroids, more or less. And that's my take on the subject. But remember, this is an unsolved case. And before we endorse any type of single killer's theory, this is unsolved. There could be something new. And as that one person said, one killer, one letter writer, or maybe there were two killers working in tandem. Back in 2019, I really thought there was something like that going on. I didn't think it was two, but I was just looking at the facts of the case, and perhaps I was using a bit too much of my own imagination to try and string everything together. And I was like, my own genuine take on the subject was, it appeared to me that there was one central mind who was planning everything, and then each crime could have been committed by a different person. So you would have a minimum of 4 participants, maybe 5 if the letter writer isn't actually committing the crimes, and that's why I called it the group murder theory. But I was totally going down the pathway of a thrill kill club, that this was something that people were doing just to commit a series of homicides and not get away with it. I imagined that there were like 5 guys sitting around a table in someone's basement nonetheless, and that they thought of a way to commit murder and not get caught. But I had to back away from that, because what did I know at the time? I was just somebody who was watching YouTube videos, reading the Zodiac Killer websites, and saying, aha, here's what I think happened. And no, that is just a simple interpretation of the evidence, and it's just based on that. It's just the first idea that came to mind looking at some of the possibilities. And right now I would like to get to your shoutouts from BuyMeACoffee.com, as well as the super thanks here on YouTube. And the first one comes to us from Batman, and I have to thank Batman once again for some continued support, all very much appreciated. And there is also one over on BuyMeACoffee.com. This is coming to us from Floyd Black 53, who says, I hope you have a great day today, Ned, and it's okay to be a fan of saxophone music, referring to a couple different things. The first is that my neighbors were playing that in the background so loudly you could hear it through the walls during the last Zodiac Killer News Report, and as someone reminded us that that could be the New Orleans Axemen putting out the threat, jazz it up if you don't want to get the axe. That is something that the Axemen said back in 1919. So I thank everybody for all their support. You guys are all awesome. And once again, anybody who makes a donation or a contribution to help support the show will get a shout out on Zodiac Mondays. And there will definitely be some funds used to purchase new true crime books to talk to you guys about, particularly in the Phantom Killer mystery, because things were a little bit messier in that one than the Axeman case. Because with the Axeman narrative, it was so simple that there's this book that came out in the 1950s called Ready to Hang by Robert Talon, which talks about the New Orleans Axeman, but that just became the narrative that everybody went with. It's almost similar to how the 1986 book Zodiac by Robert Graysmith was accepted as a pure fact, that everyone just latched onto this narrative, they thought it was true, and that that became the fact sheet of the case. However, then people investigate a little bit more, and they find out that someone writing a book prior to the use of electronic databases to store all the files has either several errors or things that might not be completely true, or that someone is genuinely just not completely in sync with the historical timeline. And then Miriam C. Davis put out The Axeman of New Orleans, The True Story, which serves as the only book on the case to date, and several books have a chapter dedicated to the Axeman, but that, it's much like Robert Talon's, just one chapter. There's also another book out there that I was going to read in the near future, but I'm just so eager to get back to the Phantom Killer case, and I definitely have the books in line the way that I would like to read them and go through them to just try and get some greater understanding, because the Phantom Killer was an unidentified serial killer that operated in 1946 in the town of Texarkana, the border town, Texarkana, Texas, and Texarkana, Arkansas, hence the name. And the Phantom Killer has never been caught, never been identified. They've made 2 movies about this case called The Town That Dreaded Sundown, and there's a continuation one that came out in the new millennium. But with this particular story, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's possible that there were unconnected murders that the general public just believed to have been the same killer. And we could definitely explore that theory a little bit more. That is not a hoax. I mean, a hoax would have to be done intentionally. This could have been more just like a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation of the facts. But please look out for some future episodes on the Phantom Killer, the hooded serial killer that terrorized Texarkana back in 1946. And Batman also had a particular request about looking into a possible Zodiac crime that I've never covered on the channel before, and that is the strange death of Pat Tan, who was found dead in a bizarre way that reminded me of a case that I talked about recently on the channel, and that was the Moraga hanging skull. And I thought that it was just going to be, okay, let's look at the similarities between the two, but I do have to give credit to Batman for sharing this with me, because Pat Tan is listed as a possible Zodiac victim, and there is a write-up about her death that is done on a forum by Bruce 3, and I believe that that is Howard Davis, the guy that I was saying wonderful things about in the earlier part of the episode. And Pat Tan passed away on April 19th of 1970, and then a day later a Zodiac killer letter comes in, and also Dave Peterson believed that her suicide was staged, and that yes, that this is a crime that occurred by rope, but knots were tied and leaves were found in her hair, which suggested that there had been a sign of a struggle. And yes, this is also something that is going to be a hanging, like as I said, similar to the Moraga hanging skull, where they can't determine whether it's a suicide or a murder. But to read something from the post that was written by Bruce 3, I just watched a true crime doc, and all the detectives along with the 2 coroner's reports state that this well-known director's death, she was found hanging in her apartment, and it was listed as a suicide. After intense reinvestigation, the perp was a construction worker and was ID'd. The knot was unusual, and a shoe print didn't match those of the police team that came into her apartment. So an autopsy doesn't prove suicide! Exclamation point. One detective worked the case and said she wonders now how many deaths are written off as suicides but are actually staged murders. Well, I mean, that's a little bit unfair. You're going to say that the perp has been ID'd and you aren't able to share that info too easily. And I did do a little bit of searching, I repeat, a little bit of searching to see if there actually was a perp that had been ID'd. But the whole story is that she was found dead by hanging, and that there appeared to have been signs of a struggle, and there appeared to be these odd boot prints, so that would suggest that the suicide was staged. Now, well, I mean, there's a question: how many deaths are written off as suicides but are actually staged murders? I will try my best to answer that later on. But then Bruce 3 continues by saying, "We do know that the Zodiac Killer wrote in 1969 that he would make future murders look like staged accidents, robberies, and killings based on anger. In his etc., that bothers me. He was speaking of staging murders. I wonder about Lieutenant Dr. Hollingsworth, who disappeared in October of 1970 and is listed as a cold case on the PD site. A day later, we have the Halloween card sent." So, I've talked a little bit about Dr. Hollingsworth in the past during the Donna Lass series, but I will definitely mention some things about that in the future. Now, some of you might be thinking that this death of Pat Tan, this hanging where leaves are found in her hair, and that boot prints are found nearby that seem like they're done, that isn't matching that of the police team, and you might think, that sounds absolutely nothing like the Zodiac Killer. But one of you guys in the comments section did point out that the Zodiac Killer mailed the Halloween card that was just mentioned that says by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire. And the Zodiac also stated, as Bruce 3 said, that he wasn't going to announce his crimes in the same way, maybe to avoid getting caught. So, is the Zodiac suggesting that he's going to start committing crimes by rope with that, etc.? I mean, he's going to make them look like routine robberies and accidents and etc., meaning that something like this, well, I'm not noticing things that are immediately suggestive of the Zodiac killer, but anything's possible, and you can always approach things with an open mind, and I'll try to do some reading on the case of Pat Tan in the future. But what I think is also more important is this question: how many deaths are written off as suicides that are actually staged murders? There was a follow-up that was written to Bruce 3's comment from Sandy Betts, who said, "I totally agree with you. I thought she was hanged in a tree, not in her apartment." That's the first thing. And as for Pat Tan's, I think that would definitely make more sense if they found leaves in her hair. But Sandy Betts continues by saying, "My best friend was killed in 1978 and was made to look like a suicide on my birthday. She was only 24 years old and killed with a .22 caliber gun. Her phone was found hanging off the hook, and she had plans for me to wallpaper her new home. We had gone to get wallpaper books together just a day or so before she was killed. The police wrote it off as a suicide even after finding the gun was in another room. The only thing missing was a painting I had painted for her." These stories happen all the time. Firstly, Sandy Betts, I'm so sorry that happened to your best friend, rest in peace. But it happens because sometimes law enforcement doesn't want to go through the hassle of investigating. A little bit similar to what we said about the Zodiac-Manson connection, although that has specific pieces of information that have to have been laid in place as opposed to a big idea. And this is not just ramblings. These cases are documented. I invite you to check out the story of Tom Sublett, the man who was found shot in the head, and the gun was found at the bottom of a lake, even though his hands were tied behind his back, and they said it was a suicide, even though very clearly it looked like it was a murder. And they didn't want to investigate because of bureaucratic reasons. I was also contacted by a first-hand connection, a family member of Daniel Huffman, who passed away at the age of 25 from a gunshot, and it was determined to have been a suicide. And that family member said, "We believe he was murdered, but the same reason. The county didn't want to investigate because of bureaucratic reasons, because they just want to label it as a suicide and then move on because they don't want to spend time and money investigating this person's death." These stories are not unheard of, and I'm definitely tempted to believe that several of them are true, that there are people who are murdered and then the murders are staged as suicides. One person whom I've talked about on the channel before who has been caught was Braulio Castillo, the CEO who murdered his wife, and he tried to make it look like a hanging in the shower, except he draped her hair forward and tied it into the makeshift noose, so it obviously looked like it was staged, like her bangs, but bangs as well as some of her additional hair were even tied into the noose in a ridiculous and obviously staged way that someone would go about that way, committing a hanging in the shower. And the reason why I talked about that case on the channel was I was a little bit new to this program, and I was going through some videos online about psychopathy, sociopathy, and narcissism, and I was using Braulio Castillo's story as a case example. And I mean, just trying to also match things like body language to the fact that he, well, went on to murder his wife. I mean, a very, very twisted and demented individual all the same, but I think that whole black box recording is still available. So the point is, I would definitely not be too quick to dismiss cases as a murder rather than a suicide, but I'm also not a big fan, though, of just looking at how you have a crime that has been taken place. Then one day later, the Zodiac killer mails a letter. The Zodiac mailed countless things in 1970. The Zodiac mailed loads of things in 1969 as well. Okay, so 2 days later, the Zodiac mails this letter, and 3 days later, the Zodiac Killer mails this letter. People say that time and time again, and I think that's where we have to draw some type of barrier between open-minded thinking and just saying, hey, this person is using mental gymnastics to try and connect their theory. If there is something a little bit more specific, like, say, for example, by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire, the Zodiac has written that out, and then you want to talk about how a crime has been committed by rope, and that there is a bigger reason than just the Zodiac mailed a different card later on. I mean, you can speculate until the cows come home, but is that actually what happened? And I think that there really does have to be this differentiation between open-minded thinking and intense mental gymnastics to just tie everything together in a way that makes sense to only one person. But what do you think? You can put your ideas in the comment section down below. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there is always BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram. And I will see you over there for the bonus podcast. Goodbye.